This is the valley of the Luangwa in south-central Africa. It is remote, but no longer isolated. Here, as in all parts of the world, wildlife habitat is shrinking. The wild animals must now compete to live on the same land. On many evenings, elephants gather on the banks of this river. They soon leave the safety of Zambia's huge South Luangwa National Park and, under cover of darkness, wade to the communal farmlands on the other side and into conflict with the villagers who live there. In decades past, elephants and rhino were slaughtered by the tens of thousands. The black rhinoceros, once abundant, is now extinct in Zambia. Today, wildlife is making a comeback. There is a new land use ethic, not mandated by government, but passionately championed by ordinary people, the farmers and ranchers around the world who share their land with wildlife. Across the border, in the scenic grass country of southeast Zimbabwe, ranchers are bringing back the wildlife shot off the land by their forefathers.
Today, a lot of the areas, wildlife has taken the place of cattle.
Half a world away, North Park, Colorado is cattle country. But now the deer, elk, and moose share this rangeland and help pay for it.
I think the pendulum has swung back, and I think the wildlife here has a bright future. I do.
In northern Arizona, on the vast Navajo reservation, the land is harsh and barely sustains wildlife. But even here, there's a chance wildlife may thrive again. From Africa to the American West, a new conservation model is taking hold. It's built on a single idea, that wildlife conservation can pay its way. Mourning in Africa is a reaffirmation of survival. In the early light, the hippopotamus and crocodile slip into the water. Grazers and browsers alike set about the day-long effort to sustain themselves. Only the predators rest from a long night of hunting. On the communal lands, the centuries-old rhythm of pounding corn sounds across Kawaza village. Women like Elizabeth Njovu take on the endless work of the food chain. They sow and cultivate the crops, harvest and dry the corn, then pound it into flour for the daily meal. They gather firewood from the forest and carry water from the village well. In her small kitchen, Elizabeth prepares a lunch of nishima. The flour from the corn and water are cooked into a thick porridge that is the centerpiece of most meals in the village. Lunch for Elizabeth's husband John and her 6 children is nishima served with boiled green vegetables. Kawaza is one of many villages in the game management area of Luponde. This is communal farmland where farmers grow corn, squash, pumpkins, mangoes, and rice, crops that are nearly irresistible to wildlife. As more people settle here, crowding the natural habitat, there are more conflicts between villagers and the animals. Just across the river in the giant South Luangwa National Park, the animals are protected and almost indifferent to the tourists around them. A single elephant feeds 18 to 20 hours a day, consuming 500 pounds of vegetation. The restless foraging of these herds often brings 12,000-pound bull elephants onto communal farms, where they can ruin a season's harvest in minutes.
This is one of the fields where there's a lot of damage by elephants. For example, you can see the pumpkin here has just been trampled on, which is almost a waste of food. As a result, the family will only be able to just get the seeds, which they would even stock for the next harvest. Now, these elephants cause a lot of damage. Usually, they are here by 8 o'clock in the evening and leave the area by 03:30 in the morning. You know that an elephant is a very clever animal. It doesn't like noise. So the only way how we try to chase them is by ringing a lot of bells and doing a lot of clapping and a lot of drumming to enable us at least find time to rest in the evening. Now we find that even all this part at times it is all destroyed by elephants.
When nothing could deter the intruding elephant, game officers stepped in to protect the villagers and their crops.
We also see that even though the elephants destroy our crops, but at the end of the day, we also get a better benefit from them. By the tourists coming in, looking at them, going back, they leave us some few monies that we are able to do our living.
It was often said in the valley of the Luangwa that local people see animals as something to eat, or something that destroys their crops, or something that killed their uncle. That could describe James Chulu Yagama, who turned to poaching after a job injury put him out of work. He killed elephants for ivory and hunted other wildlife for food. Hunting, he says, is the way of his people.
Okay,
what he's saying, people at home still want to kill, and their heart is what the hunter's heart, Dima's heart, and they still want to hunt and kill to eat.
Local game scouts arrested Yagama and other men in a major crackdown on poaching. They seized the large-caliber muzzle-loading guns, favored by poachers, and some of the ivory headed for the underground market in Malawi. But time ran out for the black rhinoceros. By the early 1980s, it was poached into extinction in Zambia.
It's all about jobs. If everybody had jobs, there wouldn't be poaching. People would be earning salaries and not have the need to hunt.
A successful drive against poaching in the Luangwa is part of a daring new program that is dramatically changing the local culture.
The biggest threat to wildlife in Africa is replacement by cattle, the cow and the plough. 95% of wildlife has been destroyed by that. Poaching is really a minor thing. So what we're trying to do is make wildlife more valuable than alternative land uses. And so people farm or look after wildlife or manage wildlife instead of these alternatives. If they're not involved, their fields are going to slowly spread across the wild lands, and there isn't going to be any room left for wildlife.
Dr. Brian Child is a fifth-generation African who knows firsthand the conflict between humans and wildlife for the same resources. He is a technical advisor to the program, known locally as CBNRM, Community-Based Natural Resource Management.
The parks have no value to the people. In fact, they have a lot of costs. The elephants go out of the parks, eat the crops. The lions go out, kill the cattle, kill the livestock, even the people. So what you've got with parks is there's a global benefit, but there's a local cost. So the poor people out here, they have absolutely nothing. A couple of pots and a hut are paying for global biodiversity. And I don't think that is socially or politically sustainable. There's two principles. The first thing is to make money, to convert wildlife into dollars and cents using tourism or safari hunting or other forms of use. Once you've got that, the next trick is to use that money effectively so that the communities realize the value. That means the benefits to the communities need to be direct, they need to be visible, the linkages need to be short.
Under the program, money is collected from the sale of hunting permits and taxes on tourist lodges. It's substantial. Hunters pay up to $12,000 to hunt big game. Some of the cash, about 2 days' pay, goes directly to each family.
Water wells project.
Other revenues are distributed to local villages.
1,243,333 kwacha.
Last year, in the Loponde game management area, local villagers decided how to spend more than $200,000. At this gathering of Musamba villagers, the debate got angry because the village committee didn't keep a promise to build new wells. They spent some of the money on themselves.
Budget ya last year ni 80 mangwiro office kapena mu 2000 ino mutitendere soti kuyako soti ku office ya MSC mutiuze.
At the end of the day, these people voted to throw several village committeemen out of office. They also set aside money for new wells, a small dam, and the hiring of more game scouts to monitor and protect wildlife. At this moment, this father is only thinking about his son's broken leg. But to the chief officer here at the Musamba Rural Health Center, the wildlife revenues mean electric power. Electrification of the clinic means better care, better medical equipment, and a better chance to cure disease. Wildlife revenues brought these power lines to the clinic, one of more than 200 projects that include the building of water wells, schools, and the hiring of teachers and game scouts. Game scouts are a civilian force hired to protect wildlife, control poaching, and educate villagers about the environment. Even former poacher James Chulu Yagama is now on the front line, employed as a game scout.
So it's not only what people say, it's also what people do and where they put their money. I mean, they're putting 20% of their cash into employing game guards. That means that they must believe a little bit in what they're doing.
Beyond the cash distribution and the community projects, the game management program is also moving to change cultural values in the Luangwa Valley. This play dramatizes the fate of wildlife as population grows and trees are cut down. The actors are portraying baboons, whose growing population soon run out of habitat. Their survival becomes uncertain.
What must be there for this leaf to produce food for the tree or for the whole plant? What must be there?
The same lesson is heard in local classrooms.
Sunlight, good, we must have sunlight. What else apart from sunlight? Yes, madam. Carbon dioxide.
Changing local culture and traditions may take years, and teachers know it begins with the young.
For the young one, at least, the mind is too fresh. When you plant this knowledge, they can easily grasp it and plant it permanently and maybe deliver it back to their parents.
There is also a revolutionary seed in this work. As village groups discuss the distribution of money and vote on representatives, They're challenging a centuries-old hierarchy that gives the local chief almost total power.
How are you?
These residents of Daniel Village gave up their money to the tribal chief, and they say he kept the wildlife revenue for himself and refused to fund their community projects.
There's one problem here. Bajanima chief, you know, he's the chief and he's royal. So we feel so, we are compressed, we are too small to talk to him. Maybe you can come in and help us.
If we look back in the history, you're looking almost at a feudal system where a chief dominates decision-making and is not held accountable. And the people underneath him are subjects. What we're trying to do is turn people into responsible citizens. And I think the shift from subject to citizens is not going to happen overnight. And I can see evidence every day that that shift is occurring.
That shift towards grassroots democracy is being fueled by the program of wildlife conservation. The rich animal population in the Luangwa River Basin is at the heart of these economic and political changes. During the dry season, more and more animals cluster around the water sources, making this one of the best places in Africa to view wildlife. A steady growth of tourism is giving local people a chance to build a more sophisticated economy. Something beyond subsistence farming or wildlife poaching. In this shop, local workers make tourist curios from the wire snares once used by poachers. These men, traditional hunters, say the animals are now more valuable because they attract tourists.
These animals, they're very important because we benefit from those. Then when I see a dead animal, me, I don't feel happy because it is like I find my daughter dying because I know that this animal is beneficial to a human being because it brings money to the community. So they're not supposed to be killed carelessly.
But there are skeptics who question the depth of these attitude changes.
I really think that this CBNRM is really, involving people getting benefits from wildlife and people owning wildlife is absolutely critical. But what everybody has learned here, and everyone will agree to this, you've got to have that policing part of it has to happen at the same time. Can't be pie in the sky, community development stuff only.
But Rogers Lubilo, a wildlife manager in the Luangwa project, believes the local changes are profound and lasting.
My father used to be a poacher, but due to the changes that are taking place now, we were able to see a communal benefit than an individual benefit. So we can see that people have started reversing from being potential poachers into conservationists. So there's really a change of attitude.
Lubilo believes the cash distributed every year is important to the change in attitude, but so are the new schools and teachers, the health clinics, wells and roads. All things the government cannot provide, that the community provides for itself with revenue from wildlife.
If people are conserving elephants and buffaloes and lions because they're valuable, along with that comes the birds and the bees and the trees, and so we're actually conserving whole regions of biodiversity. I mean, we're conserving something like 4,000 square kilometers in the GMA here. That's as big as many national parks. And there's 20 odd programs like this in Zambia. There's similar programs in Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mozambique. So in many ways, you're seeing a land use revolution. And I think that you're going to see a lot more wildlife in southern Africa in 20 years' time.
In the bush country of southeast Zimbabwe, ranchers shot out most wildlife more than a century ago. They brought in cattle to feed on the rich grasses and eliminated predators and competing grazers.
In the cattle heyday, what happened was farmers viewed the wildlife as competitors to the cattle, and so eradicated them, and equally the cattle in the numbers that they were run then eradicated the habitat to a degree that the wildlife couldn't survive anymore. So nature was kicked out of the way to make way for agriculture.
By the mid-1980s, it was clear to rancher Ken Drummond that conventional agriculture was struggling in the area. Ken understood that this land won't sustain large-scale farming or ranching.
Our soils and vegetations are just far too fragile to withstand that kind of animal impact. So that's really when the whole view for me changed, was when I realized that the right horse for the course here was a nature's animal and not a domestic animal. Now, of course, we had the problem where we had to make the river flow backwards because generations before us had removed the wildlife, and now we were trying to turn wildlife into a business, and we had to bring it all back again.
That decision in 1991 was more than a turnaround for wildlife. It was a whole new way of looking at their land. At first, many of his neighbors thought he had lost his way, but not Guy Barber.
I always loved to see game around, although it wasn't remunerative. I just enjoyed the sight of them. So for me, it was an easy change. And it was easy to accommodate wildlife once it had a value.
The shared vision for Barber and Drummond is to ranch wildlife inside a vast private conservancy in the heart of the African bush. The profit will come from tourism and big game hunting.
I understand that in the minds of some people, a conservancy is something that conserves game, but not necessarily for reward. We see a conservancy as conservation of wildlife, for which there certainly is a reward. Without the reward, we couldn't conserve it.
Guy Barber is slowly moving away from cattle. He now runs 700 head, about half the potential of his land. He's saving space and grass for wildlife. The two men convinced 5 other ranching families to join them, and the cattle fences started coming down.
And I was able to persuade them that if you've got enough room to roam for animals, you've got a wildlife business. And if you don't have room to roam, you've got a zoo. And what I was saying to them was the conventional game farming outlook is very short-sighted. I mean, it's just one step better than nothing. And that the right thing to do if you're talking about farming nature is let nature happen. And for nature to happen, you need space.
We felt that to do wildlife collectively would be far more beneficial, both to ourselves and to the wildlife, than to do it individually. Because individual development of wildlife farms would mean the fencing off of each property. So you have a much more flexible and far improved wildlife environment doing it collectively.
It was the beginning of the Bubiana Conservancy, a huge area of nearly 400,000 acres.
Yeah, we weren't exactly inventing the wheel. We just felt that this is a place where the wheel could run very nicely.
The Conservancy is remote, nearly 150 miles by dirt road or bush plain from the nearest city. Drummond sees enormous potential here.
It's more profitable than cattle because it's just far more sustainable. You can run a wildlife operation with minimal inputs. The biggest hassle is the startup cost, just to get the area together. But once you've done that, I mean, it's a bit like a pension policy. Once nature's there, it's there. It's not going to disappear tomorrow, and it withstands the elements far better than conventional agriculture does.
In 1992, the Zimbabwe government, desperate to save the vanishing black rhino, turned to the Bubiana Conservancy for help. The ranchers agreed to take on 34 of the rhino, promising to protect them.
They were introduced almost as an emergency from the poached areas. We created a safe breeding area without any expectancy of benefiting from them financially. The interesting thing about them, though, is that they've bred here faster than anybody would have believed. And our production in Bubiana is faster than anybody. What are they up to? About 90 now? 90. From 38 to 90 in what, 9 years? So obviously the browse and bush here is absolutely ideal for them. Otherwise they wouldn't be breeding the way they have been. And a lot of people come here specifically to get a view of an animal which is almost extinct and very difficult to see anywhere else.
Black rhino are difficult to see anywhere in the wild. Finding these shy animals requires expert trackers like game manager Keith Piltz. The rhino are protected from hunting or poaching, and visitors are kept at a safe distance, not to stress them.
People who see rhino in a zoo or a park don't have the same feeling about the real thing as if they have to actually track it.
The black rhino at Bubiana are monitored and protected by game scouts, hired by the ranchers in the Conservancy. The scouts also monitor the other Conservancy wildlife to ensure good game management. All of the ranchers take in money from safari hunting, but Guy Barber is the only one trying to attract tourist dollars. His Barberton Lodge offers small chalets with stunning views. Barber keeps horses for guests who want the rare experience of horseback rides through the African bush. A catamaran offers quiet cruises of the Bubi River. Guy Barber calls this an experience in the real Africa, a kind of national park in private hands.
Absolutely. A national park in private hands. And I think we want to facilitate far more flexibility in that people who want to hike, walk, climb mountains, we should be able to facilitate that in areas which is not available in parks because per se it's a dangerous country. You're not allowed to leave your vehicle.
The other landholders are waiting and watching to see if Guy makes a profit with his lodge. The Conservancy is a business.
The property owners in this Conservancy, of whom there are 7, are not in a position where their wildlife is something simply as a hobby. It's all got to pay. And whether it pays through safari hunting, wildlife sales or tourism, doesn't matter, it's got to pay. Tourism, if it's not over-commercialized, can be far more rewarding in that you can put far more tourists through an area than you can hunters. And it's not consumptive as is hunting.
There's 2 things that makes a business work. One is that it's got to be profitable. The second thing is you've got to enjoy doing it. And I really enjoy giving nature a chance.
Bringing back wildlife has meant protecting the cattle from disease and predators.
At night, you'll hear things like hyena calling, jackal, leopard, things like that, which are quite unique. And to hear them all at once is really something.
Davy Drummond is home for the weekend from college, where he's studying ranch and wildlife management. Like his father, he is committed to the Conservancy and the animals.
But I think at heart, farmers are fundamentally conservationists, and especially if we're able to demonstrate to them that conservation can pay, because that's one of the big weaknesses in conservation is that for too long conservation's been propped up by donations out of people's handbags. And that's just not a deal. I mean, you can't build an industry like that. And that's why it's important that these various conservation organizations in the world start focusing more on economics and less on microscopes.
At the end of the day, it's money. In fact, we're running probably 50% of our cattle potential here and probably about 10% of our tourism. And already the money that comes from each is pretty well equitable.
This is a fragile time for the Bubiana Conservancy. Tourism in Zimbabwe has been devastated by political instability. Squatters took over parts of the Conservancy and poached the animals. The economic loss in the last 2 years is more than $800,000.
Political stability is actually vital. Tourism is a very fragile industry, and Africa has not got a great name for stability.
To protect the wildlife, Drummond and Barber are engineering an agreement to merge with another private conservancy nearby.
We'll have something very special in the world, in 1 million acres of true, beautiful, variable habitat and a whole range of wildlife that occurs in this part of Africa.
I really feel more enjoyment out of what I'm doing than the profit in it. And as long as I can make wildlife even break even, that's good enough for me. I think we've come a long way.
Cattle drives are a common sight here in North Park, Colorado, high in the Rocky Mountains. At first light, rancher Verl Brown began moving 300 head of cattle to new pasture. Most ranchers rotate their livestock several times a year, but this cattle drive is also about wildlife. They're out of sight, but Verl knows the nearby woods are thick with deer and elk. On his Owl Mountain Ranch, cattle and wildlife go together.
The elk don't like an area that just hardly ever gets grazed because the grass is too coarse, there's dead undergrowth that's just hard to eat through. So if they have a choice between a piece of land that hasn't been grazed and one that has been grazed and the new growth has come back like a new growth on a lawn, they prefer the new growth, and they will travel quite a distance to find that.
Brown moves his cattle every few weeks, following the modern ranching practice of grazing rotation.
The hard part is to use the proper amount of cattle for the proper length of time during the proper time. And you have to work at it. But boy, if you get everything together, you can just improve pasture so much, which means you can run more cattle, which means you can run more wildlife.
Running wildlife helps Verl Brown stay in the ranching business. Every year, he earns thousands of dollars leading elk and deer hunting trips on his property. The hunting is limited to sustain the wildlife population, but it's a vital part of the ranch income.
I probably wouldn't be here right now if I didn't have it, and I definitely wouldn't have added any land to the ranch if I hadn't have had the hunting. I don't know what percentage, maybe 20% of my income is from hunting, but we don't run on a 20% margin, maybe 2 or 3%. So it's pretty important to our existence.
Ranching, even in this remote valley, is not cheap. Each cow needs 40 acres for grazing. Ranchers need another 2.5 acres to grow enough hay to get one cow through the long mountain winter. Acquiring that kind of land often means heavy debt. Income from the wildlife means economic survival for Verl Brown.
The wildlife helped me keep the land, helped me have the money to do what I want to on the land. I enjoy the wild animals, but the land, I'm here to take care of this land, and I watch it so close. I guess it really is tied in a big circle.
Ranchers, cattle, and wildlife living together and benefiting each other. Verl's neighbors, Steve and Karen DeLine, share the same vision on their Parkview Mountain Ranch.
And see if you can touch the baby.
Move slowly, Ben, with the babies.
The DeLines also use grazing rotation to keep the high pastures in good shape. Wildlife and cattle share the same salt licks. Steve is changing the fences on the ranch. A 3-wire fence, instead of the traditional 4-wire, allows the elk to easily jump the fences. The lower wire leaves room for antelope to crawl underneath.
I'm a rancher, but I'm very much an environmentalist. We deal with the environment every second of our day.
DeLine fences off the creek beds to protect fish habitat. Each year, the DeLines stock ponds and streams on the ranch with trout. Their children, Ben, Erica, and Joe, fish freely. But visitors pay up to $750 a year to fish and use their mountain cabins. A guide service pays the DeLines more than $30,000 a year for hunting rights. On this ranch, too, wildlife pay their way.
The wildlife brings in probably about a third of our income on the ranch. So yes, it's a very valuable asset to being a landowner and a rancher. The draw to the animals is what got me to be a rancher, be it our own livestock or the wildlife. I feel we're very much a part of both.
Up on the sagebrush range, where there's little grass, DeLine is mowing the brush, holding out cattle and bringing in water. This gives new grass and wildflowers a chance to grow, gradually creating richer grazing land for cattle and wildlife.
We deal with the wildlife every day, from the beaver in our ditches to in the creeks and the elk and the fences and the work through the works. And if we can get along, it's much easier on us. It's easier on them. I would like to think that our future is much more stable, that we get along with the wildlife and work with the wildlife than somebody that does not.
John Zigman at the neighboring Buffalo Creek Ranch came to North Park just out of college. He was a young environmentalist convinced that cattle ranchers were destroying habitat and wildlife.
When I was in college, I was a very ardent environmentalist, and I had bumper stickers that said cattle free by '93. So I've been on the other side, and I've come up here, and I've been doing this for 10, 11 years, and I see that the rancher is not out to destroy the land. He's one of the best stewards of the land I've ever seen. And the thing is that differs a rancher from much of the general public is that he lives on the land, and he has a vast understanding of all the interactions between the wildlife and you know, just every part of the ranch. And so often, you know, when we live in the city, we don't see the broad spectrum. There's a balance of a healthy use of our natural resources that I don't think I ever understood before.
On the ranch, managed by Zigman, large herds of elk often graze in the rich meadowland, easily jumping fences to get at the lush grass. The deer and elk are welcome to it. Zigman enjoys sharing the land with them, but he also knows the impact they will have at year's end.
It all comes down to how many hunters you can hunt in a season and maintain a healthy herd. On this particular ranch, you know, we're not going to hunt it very hard, but it still is, you know, when it comes to profit at the end of the year, I mean, it's right up there with equaling cattle or hay.
Zigman believes the threat to wildlife is not from cattle. This area is ski country. The recreation boom in the mountain valleys brings in people and condominiums. That is the threat to the wildlife, the ranches, and the health of the land.
If all these ranches were sold up and developed into condominiums and so forth, there's no place for the elk to go. There's no habitat, and you will not have the elk. So it's critical for these ranches, and we provide benefit to the elk, and they provide benefit to us.
Ranchers get together on weekends in the tiny village of Rand. It's common knowledge that wealthy outsiders already own thousands of acres of the high country. There is concern about the future.
If you keep me here on the ranch raising cattle, this ranch will not subdivide. Then you have 50, 100 homes instead of one. That's what's hard on wildlife.
Verl's son Chad works with his father, but remembers wanting no part of the ranching life.
When I was in high school, it just turned me off. And when I got to college and got out in the real world and saw how hectic it was, it's like, you know, this was nice, relaxing, calm, and I missed it.
Chad wants this life now, but even with income from wildlife, the Browns may need outside help to hang on to the land. Ranch land is expensive, taxes are high, and earnings from ranching won't support the family. That's why Chad and Verl are thinking about conservancy easements, selling some of the land to environmental groups to keep the habitat from being lost to development.
If I were able to sell a conservation easement, it would help me pay off a lot of my debt and make ranching a lot more fun. You know, not that ranching isn't fun, but boy, it's hard when you have a big debt to service all the time. So that would help me that way. And, you know, I'm not wanting to sell the ranch, so what if it affects the price? You know, that doesn't bother me. You know, I want to keep it in ranching.
You can still cut this afternoon. I'm going to go put bales.
Okay, but now after I'm done with this field, do you want me to make a swoop around?
Up here in North Park, the belief is strong among ranchers that in defending this life, in defending the future of ranching, they are defending wildlife as well. Richard Lynch is among the new generation of Navajo, in touch with the old ways and educated for the challenges of a new millennium. He is part of the Navajo Color Guard at this powwow. He proudly carries the flag of his country alongside the flag of his Navajo Nation heritage. This is the New Lands chapter of the Navajo Nation. It is on the southern boundary of the reservation. The land is hot, dry, and poor. Jobs are hard to find. Poverty leads many young Navajo to Interstate 40, which cuts across the heart of New Lands and leads the young Navajo away to the promise of jobs in big cities. June Benally weaves in the way she learned from her mother and grandmother. The colors and patterns of this robe date back to the time of the Spanish explorers. Not far away, Mae Clark uses brilliant, non-traditional wool colors in a rug of her own creation. It is an original design that challenges the old ways.
It's just basically what I feel and what I see, just like any other painter or artist. I try to put feeling into it. So I don't think I'm causing a stir that much.
But there is a stir inside the Navajo culture. The Weavers Guild and New Lands Navajo are struggling with new ideas, the old traditions, and the economic realities of today. These Navajo rugs will never grace a traditional hogan. Today, they are sold to the tourists who pass through on the interstate. The Ranchers' Roundtable is an association of livestock owners. Like the Weavers Guild, they too are struggling with significant changes and challenges to Navajo traditions. The livestock herd is a powerful symbol of wealth and prestige. These sheep will give wool, meat, and income to 3 families. What's new and changing is how these sheep and cattle are being grazed. Traditionally, the Navajo graze on one large open section of land. The soil is poor and thin. Water is in short supply. Overgrazing is a constant concern.
Years back, the people had sheep all over this country. 1,000, 2,000 sheep. And they keep it in one area. They really overgraze, And it takes longer to come back up because we don't get that much moisture.
May Horseman and the other members of the Ranchers' Roundtable follow a new grazing rotation system. Her cattle and sheep are regularly moved from one pasture to another. This allows the range time to recover, meaning better health for the land, the livestock, and the wildlife that share the land.
Each of the range units on Navajo new lands have from 7 to 9 pastures that they can rotate in. And the rotation is from 1 month to 3 months, depending on the size of the pasture in each unit. So the cattle, the sheep, the horses are in 2 pastures. There are either 5 to 7 pastures that are not being used, and the wildlife have that available to them.
Quite a few of them right here, Bruce. Yeah. Quite a few. They all move up, they come back up this side now.
Like many Navajo, Jimmy Baldwin is an excellent tracker. He sees many signs that the grazing rotation system is working for the deer and antelope.
Just track going that way, another one come back this way. When I was a kid, I was raised in this country. We hardly see any deer, or we hardly see any elk or anything.
But now you see more.
No, we see more, more elks and more deer and more antelopes,
When the land was overgrazed, the wildlife had to move on to survive. But today, the population of deer and elk on this corner of the reservation is rebounding. That's why the new lands is becoming a battleground over wildlife hunting. May Horseman and the others in the Ranchers' Roundtable want to shift the tribal rules, to give some of the hunting revenue to the ranchers who are making the land healthy for wildlife. Right now, all the money goes to the tribal council.
We need money and funds that come off the wildlife that would really be useful to the people on the range. The people who actually share the range units with the wildlife would be more than glad to have the funds to maintain the fence, to maintain the water, to maintain the land, the range land.
For more than 40 years, Jimmy Baldwin has grazed his small herd on the open range in the traditional way. This land is so poor that it takes 2.5 square miles to support 1 cow. Baldwin doesn't see the benefit of making more range grass available to wildlife.
You don't make enough. If you get more wildlife come in there, and you have to dig into your pocket, buy the salt, stuff like that, if you feed your cattle, that's where the wildlife will be. That's where they come in. More wildlife you feed, where are you going to get the money?
Dusty, do you? Well, yeah. Honestly.
Bruce Burnham is a third-generation trader who's been doing business with the Navajo for more than 40 years. He says the culture and traditions won't easily change.
If you're going to manage the game, and it's going to have any effect on the number of animals that are grazing there on livestock permits, you're going to have a major problem, because you're going to be asking one individual to sacrifice for the good of all. The Navajo that has that grazing permit, that's his status, it's his livelihood, and you're going to be asking him to cut back so that everybody will get a benefit from it.
Burnham's wife, Virginia, a Navajo, wonders if taking money for trophy hunting isn't counter to the old ways.
Hunting was sacred. Every animal, everything has a spirit. So it was disrespectful for being disrespectful to that spirit, to hang parts of the animal like the horn.
May Horseman and other members of the Ranchers Roundtable believe that once there is a benefit, once Navajo ranchers put a value on wildlife, they will begin managing them in a sustainable way.
When they get the money off the wildlife, it will be given to the range unit to buy supplementary feeding, to maintain the well, to maintain the fence, to do reseeding, to do erosion control, whatever needs to be there. There'll be a little bit more money available.
But traditions run deep, and the tribal council has rejected sharing hunting revenues with the ranchers on the new lands. Jimmy Baldwin's grandsons love to come to his ranch. He teaches them riding and roping.
Still too short. See, your rope's too short.
But the harsh life of a hardscrabble rancher is not the future Jimmy wants for his grandchildren.
Just hope my grandkids get, better grade, go to college, be somebody. Instead of be like me, hide out in the hill.
New ideas on sharing the land with wildlife are slow to take hold and may not be accepted everywhere. There are some who oppose the concept of hunting and fishing, but more and more environmental groups are realizing the alternatives aren't working. Conservation groups, including the Sand County Foundation, are working with the New Lands Navajo to find answers that work for them.
It's our experience that people who can find common cause with others who've faced similar or least related circumstances can learn from that, can help each other trade solutions. And we think that many of the best solutions are going to come up as ideas percolate up from the people who actually are on the lands.
Being with the traditional people and with no formal education and bringing ideas like the associations and the rotation systems, and the majority of them are happy and proud of what's happening on New Land.
These conservation pathfinders are working to save the wildlife for future generations. They are sharing the scarce range grass on the Navajo New Lands, protecting wildlife habitat in the mountains of Colorado, redefining the ways landowners can merge and form private conservancies, and bringing new value to elephant and rhino for those who share their land with the wildlife. The fundamental idea for each is that where there is local benefit, where wildlife conservation can pay its way, wildlife will survive.
A lot of wildlife conservation does have global benefit, but what we have here is we also have local benefit. And because we've got local benefit, it means it's sustainable in the long term. A lot of wildlife conservation projects in third world countries have collapsed because there's no funding. We're now putting in place a system that can last in perpetuity.
Private and communal land conservancies are growing worldwide to provide benefits to landowners and wildlife, whether it's for monkeys in Belize or for rare antelope in Zambia. The effort is to link landowners together with the wildlife for the benefit of each.
At the heart of this wildlife conservation movement is the spirit and conviction of the people who make it work. 1 acre, 1 ranch, 1 village, 1 elephant, 1 lion at a time.